Metallica's Enter Sandman riff is one of the most recognizable riffs in all of rock and heavy metal. These are the reasons why it rocks so hard that it's one of the riffs that changed rock. Hi, I'm JJ Jackson, 20-year music teacher and 30-plus year performing musician, and the creator of the Jackson Music Program. And in addition to releasing my music wellness content and music lessons and courses here on this channel, I want to introduce this new series, Riffs That Changed Rock, examining what made riffs have such an impact and appeal and why they have a legacy in the history of music. So let's break the riff down. So on the rhythm, we start off with kind of ironically a bit of a shuffle groove from the power chord E power chord up to the octave E on the 7th fret of the 5th string. So we're actually doing a shuffle groove with 2 straight 8th notes. So mixing in a shuffle groove with straight 8th notes. And as we keep moving through the riff, we got that power chord E up to the octave E note. Then we're going to have a descending flat 4th interval. So going from the E down to the B flat. E down to B flat. The B flat is on the 6th fret of the 6th string. So that leads us to, in the key of E minor, that B flat is the flat 5th scale tone, or the tritone, which is like the most tense interval you could get. The one that the church tried to keep everybody away from way back in the day because it was so evil. And then bands like Black Sabbath brought us back into it. So, a little bit of a homage, probably unintentionally. Because now we're going to keep going down to the B flat, chromatic move down to the A note, fret 5 on the 6th string. And chromatic meaning we're moving one note, one fret at a time next to each other. And chromatic moves are really popular in heavy metal because it's so tense. So coming off of that chromatic move, we have a final ascending 5th interval from that A note back up to the octave E. Leading us back into a repetition. And it's interesting that in the history of the riff, originally Kirk Hammett wrote where that first part leads directly into the tail. That's where we're using the G power chord. So fret 3 on the 6th string, fret 5 on the 5th string, G power chord, F sharp power chord, just shift it down to 2nd position, 2nd fret and 4th fret. And with the open E string, alternating in between there to give it the rhythm. And then add some chunky palm muting accents into there. And we're back to that E power chord to start everything over. And originally, Kirk Hammett wrote it to be like this. Still a rockin' riff, but then Lars Ulrich came in and suggested to do 3 repetitions and then put those power chords at the end, the G and the F sharp power chords. So to do 3 repetitions of that first part. Then the tail.
The main riff is Kirk's. We just built on from there.
When I came up with the riff for Sandman, I didn't even really think twice about it. I just threw it on tape and thought, well, maybe these guys will like it. Lars called me up and said, wow, man, this is a really great riff.
So you take all of the musical aspects and, of course, that heavy distorted guitar amp sound, and through how the sound actually physically came across to people's ears when the album first came out, then that brings us to the only other part that rocked more than the riff, that is the cultural impact that it had. Off of Metallica's 1991 self-titled album, more commonly known as the Black Album, this was the album that had pretty much the completely black album cover with a barely visible "Don't Tread on Me" snake in there, a reference to one of the songs on the album of that name. And this was the band's first album with a new producer, Bob Rock, who was famously known for producing rock bands more softer side like Bon Jovi and Loverboy. But he came in and infused a different style of practice and rehearsal and ways of arranging the recordings so that way they could get more bite, more distorted tone, a fuller sound to the band's recording. This was in contrast to their previous 4 albums produced by Flemming Rasmussen, which definitely had a more raw kind of garage band feel, a certain excitement and desire. You could tell that they were really had a hunger during those albums. And the Black Album came around and their sound matured into something that was heavy and had groove. And I think that had a lot to do with the influence of Bob Rock and what he brought into the recording process.
Well, Enter Sandman was the first song that we wrote for this new album. It's sort of the best indication of where our heads were at in the summer of 1990 when we sat down and wrote those songs. It's the simplest song we've ever written. It's basically a one-riff song with variations of that riff for the bridge and for the chorus.
Enter Sandman had been in my lyric book for about 100 years, and no one liked it until we yanked it out again and saw a little more to it this time.
Over those early albums, one of the controversies was how Jason Newsted, their bassist that came in to replace Cliff Burton when he tragically died in a bus accident, Jason Newsted took the brunt of the guys processing the passing of Cliff, and it showed through in the recordings themselves, where the bass is pretty much non-existent in those early recordings.
We took a lot of time to find the exact sound that was going to work with James.
We can set this all back up, the bass sound from God.
I finally realized I really have to approach it as a bass part to make it more of a band thing rather than just doubling the guitar part that I'd done in the past. You know, that was one of the factors why you didn't really hear any bass on the Justice album. It wasn't just the fact that, you know, it was kept down in the mix, but actually I was playing the same thing as guitar, so it was muddying everything up, and it didn't work well.
Instead of recording all their parts separately, like they did on those early albums, individually, Rock brought in the Black Album, had the band recording more collaboratively, to where you're getting in essentially the same room, and there's definitely a better vibe that way. I know that the one time that I got to record with my band Explode the Machine, at the time we recorded our debut album, The Master's Yard, live, and that was the first chance I got to record high level with the band at the same time. And it's a much more exciting, better representation of the emotion that you get when you're performing actually with your band instead of individually. And that brought a different groove, more cohesion to the Black Album. There's also a lot more development in guitar amplification and recording, and the stereo quality, speaker quality, especially in car stereo systems coming out of the 80s into the 90s. So when people first got this album and put it in, the first track that came out was Enter Sandman, and when that riff built up and finally hit in with the drums and having a full bassy sound and this riff, it absolutely exploded out of the speakers and created a cultural phenomenon. Metallica's Black Album also came at a time where it was intentionally, unintentionally a response to the 80s, a decade of dance pop and ballad rock and hair metal and a soft sound for the most part that was safe and approachable and wasn't going to ruffle any feathers. And that's not the band that Metallica was or is. And James Hetfield is famous for saying in the early days that we're going to be louder and we're going to play faster than everybody else. So that's why Metallica's Enter Sandman riff rocks so much that it was a riff that changed rock. I hope you learned something and enjoyed the video. If you have a suggestion for the next riff, what should we cover next, and break down why, from a music angle and a societal angle, why a riff rocks. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.